All right, I see that I have three people on, so this session is definitely for you to ask any questions you want me to answer, whether they are broad about grad school application tips, or if you want something directed more towards you and your application and your personal your case by case question. Definitely put that in the chat. I will get to as many questions as possible. I do have a list of questions that I pulled from a lot of you who've been asking me questions on the comment section of my videos, but also in the last workshop that I held a couple of months ago or a month ago. So I'm gonna wait a little bit so we can see if other people get on, but definitely start writing your questions in the chat, and I will get to those as well. In addition to the ones that I have here on my phone that I pulled from different videos that I've made, and you all have asked me questions. So we'll wait a couple of minutes. That way, more people can get on. But start writing those questions down in the chat, and I will get to you as soon as I start. While we wait, because this is going to be a recorded session and it'll get posted on my channel, I believe right after, I wanted to just kind of give you some background as to kind of why I'm qualified or why you should take my advice. Um, so if you haven't been watching most of my videos, you might not know this about me, but currently I am a PhD student in my second year at the University of California, kind of at the University of California, San Diego, where I study education, specifically higher education. And so I gone through 2 PhD cycles in terms of applications. So the most recent one was when I strictly applied to only PhD programs, and then I did this test run a couple of years ago before I actually attended a PhD program where I applied to 4 programs just to kind of see how competitive I was. And so I applied to 3 Ivy League schools and 1 top school in my field. And I ended up getting only into one of those, which wasn't the Ivy Leagues. And so at that point, I knew that I wasn't as competitive of an applicant as possible because I did that test run. And so that's why I waited a couple of years before applying and actually going to a program. And so this last cycle, I applied to 10 programs and I got into half of those programs, all in all top programs in higher education. That's my specific topic that I research. Obviously, there's more detail that I go into it, but that's the broad overview topic. And I ended up getting into 5 of those 10 programs, and half of those programs provided me with funding, not fully funded. Some of them were like 3 years um, full funding, and then the last 2 years I had to like find my own funding. But the program that I'm currently in is a fully funded program for 5 years, where I received a stipend in my first year, and then in my second, third, fourth, and fifth years, I do have to work in terms of being a teacher assistant as well as a researcher, either or. Right now, I'm doing both, and that's what makes up my living stipend. They also provide tuition remission, which means that they pay for my tuition for 5 years as long as I am a 50% TA or a 50% researcher or a combination of both. And that's how I am able to receive free tuition. So pretty much this PhD program is paid for through the institution because of their fully funded package. And that's one of the reasons why I applied to this program, was because of that fully funded package potential of me receiving it. So yeah, so I'm happy with the program I'm currently in. Previously to my PhD program, as many of you know, a lot of my content is around the Harvard Graduate School of Education because I went there in 2015, 2016. So since then, the master's programs have changed. So they redesigned their master's programs. Back in the day when I applied, they had, I believe, like either nine, somewhere in the range of 9 to 12 programs that all had different topics. So the one that I applied to and I completed was the Education Policy and Management program. And my focus was on ed policy. And so at this point, I think they combined different programs. So they have like, I think 4, I believe, and then they have concentrations within those 4 programs. And so if you have questions about the Harvard Graduate School of Education application, definitely go check out my videos that I've made because I pretty much exposed my full application. And recently I shared my letters of recommendation. So everything that I know about HGSC has been pretty much said. I do want to make one more video on things that I've learned and that I didn't mention in my first video that teaches you how to get into Harvard Graduate School of Education. I did learn some other things. So I do want to make like a video just specifically on that. But if you have questions, that let me know in the in the chat here so I can address those. Let's get started with a couple of questions. I do have one here in the chat. So someone said, just submitted a PhD application looking for interview tips. So I do have a video on how to go about the interview. I think I have two videos actually. One of them goes into detail in terms of like what are the questions they asked me during my PhD interview, and I go about and kind of give you like a little mock interview of what I said. So go check that out. Is there anything in particular that you want to know? In terms of questions that they asked me for my PhD program interview were like, what are your research interests? And you have to be detailed when you explain that. They also want to know like what is driving you to pursue a PhD, and how does this program fit with those goals? And those are things that you do right in your statement of purpose, but you want to reiterate those when you are in the interview process. Um, so yeah, if you have any particular things that you want to know about the interviews, definitely write those in the chat because interview tips is really broad to me. I'm not sure what you want me to say. Like I would just say definitely practice, do a mock interview with a faculty if you can, do some with your friends if it's going to be on Zoom or some type of online platform interview. You want to make sure that you are able to do a mock one before because in person and then online interviews are completely different in terms of body language, reading people's body language, things like that. So you want to make sure that you are comfortable on camera, and because I think it's important, like aside from you talking about the content, right? Like they're going to be asking you about your research experience, and aside from that part, because I think most of you should already know that part because you're writing your statement of purpose, you're doing the work, so that part shouldn't be the hard part. I think for the hard part is coming off as someone who is interested, first of all, in the topic, is interested in the program, because most of us are applying to multiple programs, right? I applied to 10. So how do you show enthusiasm for every single program if they all are different? And that's, for me, is the challenge with the interview. And the reason why I say this is because when I did my interview with for my current PhD program, one of the things that my mentor mentioned in that interview was that I had good energy, positive energy, and she took that as a way for telling her that I am able to work in a team. So when these faculty members are interviewing you, they're also seeking to see if you are able to work not only with them, but also with the other team members on their research teams. And so she took my like positive energy and my enthusiasm in terms of like how I was like talking and things like that, as a way to signal that I would be a good fit for her team. And then she ended up obviously choosing me for the program, and I'm currently on her team. She has about 7 mentees, including myself. And so that's important as well. It's not just the content, it's not just you verbalizing all these great things you have done. It's also, can you work with the team? Can you work with this mentor? That's also part of this interview process. Okay, so I see a couple of other questions here. So Ivan, in your statement of purpose for Harvard, in first paragraph at last two lines, you mentioned Harvard's slogan or motto, "Learn to change the world." It is kind of good, but in my case, I decided to go for MIT. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so to kind of, okay, yeah. So I think I have received these questions on how do I go about crafting my statement of purpose to fit the mission or the motto slogan of the institution and the program. So if you don't already know, I do offer a statement of purpose review service that you can find on most of my videos in the description down below. But what I've learned, a lot of my clients have been people who wanted to go to Harvard Graduate School of Education. So a lot of my clients, they literally put in the slogan in their statement of purpose. And that's not what I meant in the video when I talked about that. What I mean is that you want to research the websites, the program, or the program on the website, and you want to just kind of understand what are they seeking in their applicants. So in particular for the Harvard Grad School of Education, they mention key terms on their website. They mention things like transforming education. They mention things like social justice. They mention things like let's see, what else do they mention? I haven't been on that website for a while, but like They mention key terms, and every program has this. It's just you looking at their website and exploring it deeply. But they do mention key terms that you want to make sure that you either incorporate into your statement of purpose or you somewhat indirectly talk about it. So if this program is telling us, if HGSC is telling us on their website, they want to accept people who are going to be transformative leaders or change agents in the field of education in whatever sector, you want to make sure you write something about that in your statement of purpose. So if you go back to my video on when I share my statement of purpose, I mentioned all that stuff, or I mentioned those key terms throughout my statement of purpose to signal to the HGSC committee that I explore the website, that I'm interested and that I want to become a change agent, transformative leader, etc. And those are key terms that I mentioned. So that's kind of what I meant when I said, play around their model, their slogan. That's what I meant. So go in there and review the website and include these key terms in your statement of purpose. So, for example, I applied to Vanderbilt education program, and their website obviously stated that they wanted to accept people who were interested in quantitative methods. And that's not my expertise. That's not what I want to do. I want to do qualitative methodology. And so I still applied, and I think I only applied honestly because it was a top ranked program for education policy, but it didn't fit with my career goals or anything. It didn't even fit with my methodology that I wanted to employ, anything like that. So, and I got rejected, and I obviously know why. Like I obviously understand that I wasn't a good fit for that program because I don't want to do quantitative education research, and that was their main focus. So that's kind of what I meant in terms of using the slogan, the model, as a way to mold your statement of purpose. All right, so I'm gonna answer some of the questions here because I am recording this, so it will get on my channel. And I see I only have one person on, which is great. So definitely use this as an advantage. Ask me as many questions as possible. But let me just keep going with this stream just because I don't want to stay silent and then post it on the YouTube channel. But some of the questions that I have received from the comment section as well as the workshop that I did were so one of them was would I be at a disadvantage if my bachelor's degree isn't streamlined with the program that I'm looking to apply for? So I feel like a lot of people they're scared to switch fields, right? So if you did your bachelor's degree, let's say in a STEM major, so let's just say engineering, and you want to shift over to the education sector, some people have a hard time with connecting those two fields. The easiest way to go about that, I would say, is to research or talk about in your statement of purpose something to do in relation to engineering education. So how can you provide access to STEM, you know, information, STEM fields, STEM curriculum, things in that nature in your statement of purpose. That's kind of how I would tie them in together. But let's say you want to switch over to policy, education policy, and you were an engineer for a number of years. You can also you can also make it for you to let's say talk about like engineering education policy, for example, or maybe computer science policy, and you want to include computer science curriculum and courses throughout the throughout K through 12 education systems, whatever it is. And so that's one way you can kind of streamline and make it relatable. But if you completely want to get away from your bachelor's degree field, whether it's let's say engineering and you want to go strictly for education, then you can just say that directly in your statement of purpose. Just say, for a long time I've been an engineer, and here are the reasons why I want to shift over to education. And then just, it has to be brief though. Make sure that you state the purpose is focused on education, but definitely state why you're making that shift. And that's how I would go about doing that. Let's see, we have a question in the chat here. What would you advise applicants to do during the waiting period? That's a good question. I would say there's not much you could do in terms of your application at that point. So you can't go back and add something new. You can't go back and um, what's it called? You can't go back and change anything really. The only thing you might be able to change is maybe submitting new GRE scores. Sometimes they allow you to do that depending on the program. But at that point, I would just relax, and really there's not much you can do. I guess something you can do is look for fellowships, look for scholarships, maybe I would say institutionally, and then maybe prepare for like looking for graduate student jobs. So whether it's going to be a teaching position, whether it's going to be research, because some programs, especially for the master's programs, they don't offer full funding. So if you know that your program's not going to offer or guarantee you full funding upon admission, that's one thing that I would definitely do during the waiting period is make a spreadsheet and list things that you can potentially apply to if you want to attend that school, if you get accepted, obviously. Because for example, a lot of the master's programs, they don't offer funding with your admissions. So you want to make sure that you did the background work so you're ready to you're prepared to apply for those jobs once you get admitted, because once you get admitted, you're going to be admitted usually in March. That's usually when admission it depends. So for master's programs, March, for PhD programs as early as January, mostly in February. So yeah, so I would say prepare to you know, apply for positions, especially for the master's programs, if your programs are not fully funded. Um, Other than that, I would just say don't worry too much about it. Don't stress about it. There's really nothing you can do at this point. You've done all you can in terms of trying to get into whatever program you're trying to get into. Once you get accepted, on the other hand, then I would worry about like housing. That's a big thing. Like especially if you're going to be either moving internationally from like a different country to the U.S., for example, or if you're moving from state to state, like I did. Housing is always one of those things that is difficult, just because sometimes you can't come and see the apartment or whatever wherever you're planning to stay. I am going to have more videos on how to look for housing at in graduate school and what I did later on in the I want to say late winter quarter, so sometime in the March when you all are learning about your decisions. That's when I want to make videos about it. But I do want to share my experience with housing and how I went from like one state to another and how I went about that process. So there is going to be videos coming out on that. But yeah, so at this point, I would just plan ahead. Um, Let me know if you want to know anything in particular in terms of what I just mentioned. Put it in the chat, and I will answer that. So someone else is saying, so my MIT computational science and engineering clearly stated need of students bilingual, which means who were interested in computing for master's and also at their field. But okay, I'm not understanding the question. Can you be more clear on what you want me to provide advice on? But my research interest is in neuromuscular disease, with which neither related to my major undergrad. Okay. So again, I think what I mentioned, if your undergraduate degree or your research doesn't really align or directly align with the program you're applying to, then you want to state that. You can state like, you know, I'm interested in doing this type of research at the PhD level. Um, and then explain why, right? So be direct, explain why and what your career goals are, and then you can state in your statement of purpose, I started my undergraduate career as this major, I went into this field, but I wanted to switch fields because of this reason. And that's how I would go about explaining. But you want to be brief. Don't tell the whole story behind why you chose the major in the first place and then why you're switching. They don't really want to know that. They just want you to be direct. Okay, I switched my major because of this reason, and now I want to focus on this topic, and then focus on that topic for the rest of the statement of purpose. Okay, let's look at some other questions that I've been receiving from the comments of my videos. So, would I have a lower chance of admission if the college I attended isn't a prestigious one? And the answer is yes. I know a lot of people that have gotten into like Ivy League PhD programs and they did their undergraduate school at like, if you want to call it a lower ranking school. Even in my experience, like I went to Washington State University for my undergrad, and that's not a top 14 school in terms of rankings, right? And I was still able to get into HGSC, into the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I was still able to get into top programs in my field for PhD programs. So it doesn't really matter what type of school you go to as an undergrad in terms of graduate school admissions. Obviously, they're going to be looking at your transcript. They're going to be looking at different factors, the holistic approach to your transcripts. Obviously, what courses you did take in undergrad, like how rigorous were those. So talking from experience, when I was an undergrad, I actually got a dual degree, which meant I got obviously 2 degrees, and that showcased that I was interested in learning, right? And I also took 150 credits in total, or more than that, actually. I think I took, like, well, I completed, I think, like, 160 something credits, and my degree only required 120. So that's showing my ambition there. It's showing that am interested in all these topics, and I didn't do that intentionally just to get into top master's programs. Honestly, when I was an undergrad, I didn't even know I wanted to go to grad school, to be honest. I think I decided I wanna go to grad school my 4th year. I was in my at my undergrad for 5 years because my majors required an extra a semester, which I decided to just make it longer and do the full year, because I studied abroad and things like that. But anyways, I was there for 5 years, and in those 5 years, I completed like over 160 credits, and I only needed 120. And so I think the committee saw that I was ambitious, that even though I didn't go to a top 14 school or whatever they call it, for undergrad, I was, I taking all the opportunities I could from my institution. And that's kind of how I showed that throughout my transcript as well as my resume and CV, because I had an extensive resume and CV. It was actually 5 pages for HGSC. I condensed that for the PhD programs to 4 pages. But that's kind of how I showed, my ambition, right? And I wasn't even thinking about the whole prestigious school either, because I didn't even know about rankings at that point. I didn't really care about rankings, and I still don't care about rankings. Like, I would say, don't go to a PhD program or a master's program just because it's highly ranked or it's an Ivy League. You want to go to a program that's going to fit your career goals, and especially for the PhD, you want to go to a PhD program where the advisor fits with your research, because the PhD is a research degree, and if you're going to a program that where the advisor doesn't even fit the research or topic you want to explore, then you're doing a disservice to yourself and your future career as a researcher, as faculty. Those are key things to consider when you are selecting PhD programs to apply to. Um, yeah, so let's see what's in the chat, 'cause I see a couple of things. Is entrepreneurship a viable career for PhD? I think it can be. It just depends how you're explaining it in the statement of purpose. So if you're stating like, my career goal is to become an educate or a social entrepreneur, then you have to explain why. And I think that why part's going to be the key part in terms of making it a viable career, right? Um, but anything that you set your mind to is what you should write, but you want to make sure you explain why. That's going to be the important part. Like, why is that important to you? And usually, especially if you're applying for like education programs, there has to be an impact portion to it. So, why is it important for you to become an entrepreneur in education? Like, what impact do you hope to make on your community, on your country, internationally? Whatever it is you're planning to do, you want to make sure that why part is clear and it's impactful to some type of community, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for you to transform education. So transforming education always leads to an impact, and obviously a change, either systems, policies, practices, spaces. And that's what you need to do in terms of explaining entrepreneurship and why you want to be an entrepreneur. Okay, so let's see. Do you have publications? So when I was applying for PhD programs, I had 2 publications, but they were in small journals, like like they were. So one of them was institutional journal, which is really small too. And the other one was it was a national one for undergrads. And those are my only 2 publications. But the reason why I decided to like put those in my resume or CV, and why I think they're semi-important, is because if you are applying for PhD programs, you are going to be expected to publish work. So, for example, my program right now, like in my 3rd year, I have to do a qualifying exam, which is a literature review. And that literature review has to be publishable. So once I complete it, if I pass that qualifying exam, the expectation is for me to go further and publish that in a journal. And so I wanted to showcase to the committee that I knew what this process was, or Maybe not the full, like, because I honestly, I'm still confused of how to publish, to be honest. But I had like experience. I had this mentor who was walking me through, like, okay, here's how you publish in journals. So I wanted to show the committee pretty much that I knew what the process was like. I knew that publishing was something that PhD students and then academics should be doing in their careers. And so I wanted to show the committee, hey, I have this experience with publications. Obviously, my publications are in top tier journals, but I'm showing you that I have some experience. Obviously, I want to learn more when I'm in the PhD program, um, and that's why I mentioned them. So if you're worried about, like, I don't have any publications, so I can't apply for PhD programs. You do not need publications to apply to PhD programs. Yes, they could be helpful, but I don't even know how helpful they were because none of my advisor has never mentioned, like, oh, I liked your publication in undergrad. Like, they never mentioned that. Um, so I wouldn't worry too much about it if you're like, I don't have any publications. But if you are, let's say if you're an undergrad right now and you are working on some research, what one of my strategies that I would do is I would put in the publication in the resume or CV, even if you haven't even like started the process. If you're considering publishing that work, I would mention it in the resume and CV, and then in parentheses, put under like put something along the lines of like um that you're working on it, like currently working on it or something along those lines. But like that's gonna show the community like, okay, you are considering publishing this work, even if you're not at that stage yet, you're considering it, right? So I would put things like that, or like if you recently submitted a publication and you haven't gotten a response, but you're applying, I would mention like under review or something. So I would put in parentheses like, what is the actionable thing that's been happening with that publication? And that's one strategy that I did receive. One tip that I received from one of my mentors when I was applying for grad school, they were like, okay, you have this work that you're doing in your undergrad, write that you plan to publish it, even if you're not even at that stage yet. That way, and so I would advise you to do the same thing. Okay, let's see. So I am only applying for masters. Okay, I started independent research career from start of this year. I published 8 papers on various international journals, but all papers are under review. For some, first review completed. Does admission committee count my research work? So that's a tricky question because from what I know, I'm not an admissions counselor, so I want to throw that out there. I'm basing all of my advice to all of you, in the 3 rounds of graduate school applications that I've been through, and then what I've learned from just a lot of my friends who have also applied to PhD programs and master's programs. But honestly, if you have 8 papers and they're under review, I wouldn't mention all 8 papers in your resume or CV because, you don't have a track record yet of having these published. It's gonna tell the community like, "Oh, this is kind of fishy. The person hasn't had any works in journals, but they have all these 8 that are under review." I would probably put like 1 or 2 that are under review. That way they know that you're working on things. But in terms of like independent research, I think a lot of the time, graduate school committees, they're looking for formal research experiences. Because informal research in this case, like they're not gonna know if you actually have a command of the research process. And that's what they want to know. Like when they're asking you like, what is your research experience? They're asking you pretty much to tell them like, what do you know about the research process? And can that experience help you succeed at the PhD level? Because obviously PhDs are research degrees. And so that's showing the committee like, okay, this person has a command of the research process. Maybe they know like a few little things here and there, and a PhD training will help them like refine those skill sets. And if you mention like independent research without a mentor, if you don't have a mentor guiding, helping you with this work, then they're not going to know if you actually have a command of it because you don't have that expertise. So whenever I write about my experiences with research, I always mention that I have a mentor that's who's guiding me because it's showing the community that okay, I'm first taking direction because you're gonna have an advisor as a PhD student, and so I can first take direction. I can like work with a faculty member, but also they're helping me understand the research process. So if you don't have a mentor that's guiding you with this independent research, then personally, I wouldn't mention it. At least in detail, or maybe just put like a sentence or two saying like, because of this, I decided to do independent research, where I did this, this, and this, and that's how I would go about it. It's kind of broad and brief. But if you don't have a mentor, then I can see the committee being like questioning if this work is credible. So I would personally not mention it in that sense. If you have a mentor, yes. All right. May I know, does the low TOEFLE, I forgot what that stands for. These are like international, I'm guessing like language-based scores, and I never taken these tests, by the way, result in application rejection. So I've never taken these tests. I wasn't an international student, but if I were just give advice here, I would say that they can lead to rejection. And the reason why I say this is because if you are applying to US school graduate programs, they're all in English, right? And if this score is telling the company that you don't have a command of English, they're not going to feel confident they're going to be able to, if you, especially if you're applying to education programs, you talk a lot in classes. You're expected to contribute verbally. So literally, some of my classes this quarter and last year, I had 3 people in one class. Currently, I have like 6 in one. So that's really small. And they're expecting each person in the class to contribute something, which means you got to verbalize um, whatever it is that we're learning, right? So I can see how a low score on one of these language tests could lead to rejection because they're going to say like, well, this person does not have a command of the English language based on this test. So how can they succeed in a PhD program that's English based? So I can see that happening, but I'm not an expert in this. I never taken the test, so I would say reach out to that admissions committee and ask them these questions. Yeah, so I would ask them that question. But on the other hand, though, if you're worried about having a low score on this test, you can show that you have command of the English language in different ways. So one of them is writing a really great statement of purpose. Something else you can do is if your undergraduate institution was all in English. All those things are signals that you have a good command of English language, right? I'm not sure what that other test is, the IELTS. Maybe if you spell it out, I might know, but honestly, I'm not sure. But that would be my advice. Can you please tell about writing samples? I do have a video where I shared my writing sample, and I gave a couple of tips on that. But I think it's gonna depend on your field. Um, so I guess one tip that I could give right here is I would say try to submit a body of work that is in the field you're trying to get into or that you're applying to. I submitted a final essay that I wrote for one of my master's classes as my writing sample. And usually I would say you want to make sure that you submit something that's either been graded or looked over by an academic, a faculty, or something that you publish. And those are the things that's the route that I would go. If you don't have any publications or if you have been out of school for a long period of time, then you could also submit something that excuse me, something that you maybe worked on in your workplace. So, for example, before I applied to my PhD programs, I worked for 4 years for a federally funded program at a community college. And through that experience, I had to write grants. And my grant proposals were like 64 pages. So I could have submitted that grant proposal as part of my writing sample. Um, yeah, so that's those are some tips that I would give, but definitely go watch my video where I share my writing sample because I give other tips there as well. And if you have more directed questions about that, write them in the chat here, and I will answer them in that sense because I can tell you a lot about writing samples, but I don't know what exactly you're looking for. Do I have do I have to select the program when I'm filling the application form? Do I have to select the program? I'm not sure what you're actually asking here, but if I read it directly, like, and just answer what you're saying here, I would say yeah, they're gonna ask you like which program are you applying to. So let's say you're applying to an education program, right? And usually education departments have multiple master's and PhD programs. They're gonna ask you on the application which program are you applying to, and then for HGSE, for example, they're gonna ask you like which concentration are you applying to, are you considering? So they will ask you these questions on the main portion of the application. Um, okay, so for PhD in public policy, type of writing samples they require. So for writing samples, they don't. Unless they strictly state it on their website, we want you to submit a publication. We want you to submit whatever it is, then you stick with what they say on the website or on the application prompt. If it's really broad and they're saying submit a writing sample and that's it, then you have to kind of assess it on your own. So I would submit if you did public policy research as an undergrad, for example, or if you did anything like let's say policy related as an undergraduate, that's what I would submit as my writing sample. If you're like not if you didn't do anything policy related in undergrad or in your professional work, then I would go ahead and submit something that showcases your writing skills, which could be anything really. So something I would say something that's been graded, that you did well on, that you got an A, that you got good feedback, um, and that's maybe of interest to you, like a topic that's interesting to you. That's what I would write. I know for education, and you asked about public policy, but so I guess I would say for public policy, I'm not that familiar with the space, but you also can submit like a proposal. You could submit something that made an impact. For my writing sample, for example, um, it wasn't a traditional essay. The writing sample that I submitted was a design of this program that I wanted to implement it at a middle school. So I pretty much was in that essay, I was writing how like these different theories we learned in class, how I could apply them to this creation of this program that I wanted to potentially implement sometime in my career. It was a hypothetical program that I created based on some theories we learned in class, and that's what I submitted. So I always want to say like go with something impactful or theory based. Theory based, I think, would be the best case scenario because again, PhD programs are research degrees, which you're going to have to write a lot of literature reviews. And so if you can show the committee, like, I know how to write literature reviews, whether it's in public policy or a different topic, that's going to be a good thing for your application. What about the scholarship slash funding for integrated MS PhD programs? Um, I would say you would look on the website and see what they say about that. So again, if this program is like MS PhD where you receive an MS while doing your PhD, most PhD programs are fully funded, so you would receive funding for your Masters of Science. But some programs, what they do is they have you first complete the master's degree and then potentially get into the PhD program. So they're really assessing you on your work for the masters. In that case, they might not provide funding for that if that's the route that they're taking. So I would say look on the website and see what's the how they're asking applicants to apply. Is it a PhD program where you get your master's degree on the way, or is it first you have to apply for, or first you have to complete the master's program before you get into the PhD? That's going to determine funding, and then also just ask the financial aid officer, and ask them about the funding. How does it work? And that can be a simple email that you submit to your program. Because I personally never applied to joint master's PhD programs, so I'm not exactly sure how that works in terms of funding, but that would be my guess. What I just said. Is GRE necessary? So again, that's going to depend on the program. Because and then obviously the situation, right? The pandemic last year they stripped the GRE from the application process. It was optional. This year, I'm not sure. I'm not applying, so I haven't really looked into it. But look on the website; it'll let you know like GREs are required. It's optional, etc. I do have a video on what to do if they state that it's optional, whether to take it or not. I have a video on that, so go watch that. But pretty much what I state in that video briefly is I would take it if you have a low GPA, for example, or if you don't have a lot of publications, or if you have a weakness in your application. I would take the GRE to offset that weakness. If your application components are strong and you don't need the GRE to showcase a strength, then I would not waste my time on the GRE. Personally, I don't do well with standardized testing, so um, I didn't focus on the GRE. I didn't even study for it. I just took it just because it was a requirement, and I focused on the other parts of the application and made those stronger to offset the slow GRE score. If I share my writing sample, which isn't on a Scopus Index journal, will that be considered or affect my application? I think it depends on the field. But in general, they don't expect their applicants to have publications in top tier journals, to be honest. Unless you're applying to those really competitive programs like the MITs, the Harvards, etc., and you're applying to the PhD program, then you might want to have some top tier publications because the pool of applicants is going to be very strong. And if you don't, and if those people have, let's just say there's a pool of 50 people applying to Harvard's PhD program, and more than half of those people have publications in top tier journals, then you're not becoming competitive enough, right? And then, so I would say in that sense, if you're applying to those top tier PhD programs, then I feel like publications do matter. But if you are applying to any other program that is not top ranked in your field or an Ivy League, then they don't really expect you to have publications. They obviously want you to learn the process while you're in a PhD program. So yeah, so I guess answering your question, like it just depends on what you're applying to and then how competitive the program is. Okay, I haven't appeared for GRE. A few of the universities mentioned GRE is recommended not mandatory. Will it be a risky decision to apply to those universities? I don't think it would be a risky decision. Like obviously if they're making it optional, like they can't not accept you because you didn't take it. Um, like I mentioned earlier, I think it just depends. If you think that your application without the GRE is strong, then I wouldn't take it. If you feel like there's a weakness in your application, then you might want to take it if you can do well. So that's the key part there. If you could do well, then you might want to take it. That way you're able to offset that weakness in your application. You want to make sure that your whole application, every component is strong. Um, and if that GRE is going to help, then take it. If it's not, then don't worry about it. Are research and professional experience interchangeable if one is applying for filmmaking PhD? That's a good question. I think it just again, and sorry for saying this a lot, but it's gonna depend. I don't know if filmmaking PhD fields that in depth. So you have to do the research, right? Go and see what maybe faculty members' CVs and resumes are. Some of them have it publicly on their website. Go and see what type of professional experience they have and what their research looks like. And then try to mold your materials based on that. So in education, for example, in this particular program that I'm in, they emphasize on their website that professional experience is key. So they were only going to accept people that had experience in the education field. And so knowing that, I knew that this program required me to have education experience in the field, but also research because again, a PhD is a research degree, right? And so I would say with your question here, because it's a PhD in filmmaking, you want to make sure you have experience in research in that field because of the PhD. If it would have been a master's, a lot of master's programs are terminal masters that prepare you for a skill set, and and that wouldn't require really research. It would require more professional expertise. Okay, so someone just got shortlisted for okay, so shortlisted for PhD interview. I need interview tips for PhD interviews. So I do have a video that focuses on like a mock interview that I did with myself. So I pretty much posed questions that they asked me in my personal PhD interview, and then I answered them how I answered them in my actual interview. So I would say go watch that interview, go watch that video on my channel, so you can see kind of like how I went about answering certain questions. But really, I would say you want to make sure that you know your career goal and it has to be clear. You want to make sure that you know how to talk about your reached experiences, like how to talk about theoretical frameworks, how to talk about your questions, how you came about those questions, what the literature says, and etc. So you want to know how to speak about those in the interview in a compelling way and showing them that you have somewhat of an expertise in that field and then you want to gain more expertise in the PhD program. Um, you also want to know, I talked about body language and just things that are not content specific. So you want to make sure that if you are doing your interview um, in a virtual setting, that you practice beforehand. You do a mock interview in a virtual setting. That way you kind of see like what you look like. Are you I'm big on energy. Like energy showcases that you are interested. So if you're like, very like monotone and like just talking like this, I don't like the community's gonna be like, are they even interested? Why did they apply? Like, it doesn't seem like that would be a good fit. So I would work on like the body language, how you talk, your voice, things like that. Things like these are tips that like I think maybe I might be like just too critical, but like I think those things do help. And I mentioned like earlier, I said an example of like my during my interview, my advisor, she like commented on that. Like she commented on my energy. And she liked that because it showcased that I was able to work um on a team, right? And you're gonna be working with other graduate students, but also the professor. So all those things matter too. Not it's not just you knowing your content in much detail because they already know that they know that through your resume and CV. They know that through your statement of purpose. So I'm looking at the other things that can give you an edge from someone else. So there's a lot to consider there. So I would say if you have any more directed questions towards interview, ask me because obviously that question that you asked is really broad. Interview tips like there's a lot I can say. Do you want to know about content specific things? Do you want to know about like body language? Do you want to know about um, questions they're gonna ask you? I don't know. Ask me in the chat here. Let's see. Okay, does mature students have less chance of getting an admit in PhD? And I'm guessing what you mean by mature students is maybe like people who have been in the field for a long time or older students. And honestly, the average age, and don't quote me on this, but like the average age of like PhD programs, the range is like 30 to 35. Um, so if that's what you mean by mature, like a lot of people in my program, like they have families, they have children. Someone in my program currently is having a child next quarter, they're taking the quarter off. So no, that does not even like age doesn't matter at all. Like they're gonna accept like in my program, the age ranges from like right out of undergrad, 22 years old to I think my adult this person in my cohort's like 35, I believe. So there's a range in there. So that does not matter. Don't worry about that if that's what you're worried about. Yeah, age doesn't matter. It just what matters is why do you want to apply for a PhD and attain a PhD? That's really what they're looking for. Yeah, does not matter. Generally, international journal reviews work for 6 to 8 months, and some of my research is on solving problems for my community and people like instant blood count results for diagnosis. So for some of my research work, okay, yeah. So if you can't find mentors, I personally wouldn't write them in my resume or CV, only because where's the credibility? Like, you know what I mean? Like if you're not publishing and other scholars haven't reviewed your journals, and giving you feedback and things like that, like the credibility is not there, and so it. And this sucks, right? But like, it's not counted as actual research. Um, Yeah, so I would say I would probably not write it in there. How to explain low GPA in our SOP even though being a batch topper. I'm not sure what batch topper is, but again, I do have a video on how to go about explaining your low GPA. But going my thing is if you have a weakness in your application, then you wanna offset that with, great accomplishments in other areas. So make your other areas of your application strong, um, to offset that GPA. I know someone in my cohort, for example, as an undergrad, they had like a 2.8 or something, and most PhD programs in particular, they actually want at least a 3.0. But obviously, the student was able to get into the program, and so I read her statement of purpose actually on this. It's on this channel, and I thought it was great. It was clear. I knew what she wanted to do, etc. So I can see why she got accepted, even though she had a low GPA as an undergrad. But also that low GPA as an undergrad was from like a lot of years ago. So they might not even taken that into consideration because of how long ago it was. Um, so I would in your statement of purpose, I don't think I would explain it if it doesn't relate to your theme of your statement of purpose. If there's a section on your application that asks you directly, do you think your GPA is showcases your intellectual ability? Then there I would explain it. And I know HGSC does have that question. So if you're applying to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, they do have a question about GPA, and that's where I would explain it. But If they don't ask you that question and your statement of purpose is not in education or doesn't have a theme surrounding like persistence, graduation, whatever it is, then I would not mention the low GPA. Instead, I would go ahead and make your other section stronger. Okay, let's see. So yeah, so someone's asking, so work doesn't count for admission as equal to formal studying under mentor or professor. In my opinion, I would say they're not equal. Like you have to have a mentor or professor who looking over your research. If it's not formal, then they won't really count it because even if you, in some applications, especially the Harvard Grad School of Education, they strictly ask you like, how much research experience do you have? And on there, if you're putting that you have 10 years experience, then they're going to ask you like, okay, who did you work under, and give us more details. And if you say no one, then they're going to be like, well, that doesn't count. Um, yeah, so I would say, unfortunately, you have to. It has to be a formal setting for it to count, which kind of sucks, right? But that's just how academia works in the United States, unfortunately. Um, can I talk about a research manuscript on my CV and maybe be in, and maybe include the research learnings from the experience? Yeah. So what you could do is you're gonna have different sections in your CV, right? So in my example that I do have on my channel, I put publications. And there I just put the publication with the name of the article, where it was published, etc. And then I have a different section titled research experience, and that's where I talk more in detail about that experience. And so I talk about like, my mentor, I talk about methodology, I talk about results, I talk about implications. And so yes, so you could have two different sections with the same thing. So one of them, publications, just a publication, and then the other one could be the experience part where you talk about it more in detail. All right, let's see what other questions I have over here. What to do if an advisor or potential advisor does not reach back out? So I'm guessing this person was asking like, um, I emailed this professor who I want to potentially be my advisor for my PhD program, and they haven't emailed me back. So what do I do, or what does this mean? So I did that. That's usually something one of my mentors told me like, you want to reach out to professors to kind of like let them know that you're applying to the program, blah 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 blah, ask them questions, right? So I did that, and honestly, I got one response out of like the 10 that I submitted, and that one response was a generic answer that got submitted to everyone. So what I would say to this person is, don't worry about if this professor doesn't reach out or reach back out to you and doesn't email you back, because honestly, they don't want to give advantages to people, all like their applicants. That's the generic response I received. They were like, thank you for reaching out, but I cannot, provide a lot of insight. Look on the website, because I don't want to give any advantages to any of the applicants. And so yeah, if you reach out to them and they don't respond, that does not mean they don't want you as an advisee. That does not mean that they don't want to accept you. It just means that they don't want to give advantages to people, to applicants, but also maybe they're just busy with a lot of inquiries, right? And a lot of these faculty members, especially at the top schools like Harvard, they actually have assistants that sift through these emails because they get a lot of emails every day. So their assistant sifts through these emails, and those are the people that probably reach out to you, to be honest. Um, yeah, so if you're submitting an email to these professors during the application season, expect not to receive a response. So that's why I always say, like, if you're applying, you want to start that process early in the summer, because in the summer, if you email these professors, you have a higher chance of them responding to you. Um, so yeah, so I would consider that. Let's see. So someone's asking, please provide tips on diversity statement. What unusual topics can be focused upon? So with this, you shouldn't first of all make up things anywhere like SOP, diversity statement, personal statement. Like don't make up experiences, don't make up anything. Um, and what if and don't think of it as unusual topics. I know you want to be unique, but I think everybody has a unique story to tell, and that's how I would go about telling the story. Tell them who you are. And whenever I read statement of purposes, because again, I do have a statement of purpose review service that I provide to a lot of my subscribers, but really any clients. One of the major things that I see that people do that I think that needs to be improved is the detailing behind their stories. Like in order to be unique, you need to be specific. So if you're saying like, I mentioned this in one of my recent videos. Like if you say something like, I was born and raised in a village in China or Thailand or United States. That doesn't really tell me much as a reader. Like I want to know which village. I want to know what like what's around. Like talk a little bit about that village. Like is it a mostly low income, predominantly Latino, or whatever it is. Give a little bit of context, and that's how you're going to be unique, and that's how you're going to be. I think what is the word? That's how you're going to be unusual, right? Is by telling your story in detail, and so they know who you are. If you just provide a lot of broad terms, a lot of broad statements, then that can apply to any applicant, and that's not what they want. They want to know you and your story. So the way that you tell your story is by being detailed. That's I think one of the most common feedback I give on statement of purpose is being detailed. So don't just say like, "Oh, I worked for this large tech company, blah 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 blah." They want to know which tech company it is because that's going to provide context. So be specific, and that's how you're gonna make yourself unusual or unique or whatever you wanna call it. And there's no topic they're looking for. They're looking to know you. And I mentioned this in a previous video, like, um, your application, so your statement of purpose, your diversity statement, these are all initial interviews. Some PhD programs, and most master's programs do not have an interview phase. So this is your initial interview. So your statements, those should bring life to your resume and CV. Your resume and CV are documents that are going to showcase your skill sets and what you've accomplished. Your statement of purpose and diversity statement is going to show the stories behind how you got to those accomplishments. So if you started your own startup, for example, they don't want to know like, oh yeah, I started this startup and I have 1,000 people, blah 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 blah. Like, yes, that's important, but they want to know the behind the scenes. How did you get to this point? Like, what made you want to create this nonprofit? What impact did you want to make? What was the research you did behind you starting the nonprofit, and how does that relate to your career goals and interest in graduate school? That's what they want to know. They want to know the stories behind the numbers, the stories behind the skills. They don't want you to reiterate what you mentioned in this resume and CV on a statement of purpose. That just defeats the purpose of the statement of purpose or diversity statement. So yeah, so I'm not sure if that answered your question, but there's no specific topic that they're asking of the applicants. Just say who you are, tell them who you are and your experiences. That's what they want to know. Are 3 pages and a half too much for a CV of those who want to get into a master's program? Unless the prompt says like stick to a certain word or stick to a certain page limit, then I would say 2 to 5 is a good range. My when I was applying for master's programs, my CV was 5 pages long. And the reason why I decided to like have an extended CV for a master's program was because I thought so I applied for master's programs straight out of undergrad. And so I thought that because I didn't have experience, full-time experience in the field, that I wasn't competitive enough. And so my thought process was like, okay, let me show them everything that I had accomplished, everything that I had done as an undergraduate student, even if it was 5 pages long, because I want to offset this weakness that I thought I had, right? That I didn't have like professional experience. I never worked full time. I was just a normal student, right? So that was how I went about it. Like I was like, I'm just gonna show them like all my skill sets in the CV, and it's 5 pages, and that's gonna offset me not having full time experience. So yeah, so I would say there is no right or wrong. I would say if your 3 pages and a half is intentional, like you literally thought like you thought out, here's why I'm putting these sections, here's why I'm putting these experiences, then I would say that's fine. So I would go back to your CV or resume and ask yourself like, okay, is this important for my mission, my career goals, why I want to attend graduate school? If it is, stay with leave it. If it's not, delete it. And I do offer also, in case you want advice, I do offer a resume, CV, what's it called? Review service as well, where I give you advice. It's on Fiverr. You can look me up, or you can look at the description in my videos, and you should be able to find that service if you want to take advantage of that. Okay, what questions to ask during the Q&A meeting at the university's program for applicants? So I'm guessing that you maybe attended a webinar, or you want to attend a webinar for your program, and what questions you should ask about. So first of all, I would say there's no right or wrong. There's no dumb questions. Ask every question you want. Like, you want to learn about the program, and that's why they have these webinars. So ask them whatever you need answers to. One thing that I would personally, what I would ask is stuff about funding, because it's expensive, right? And one of my tips, and I hope that you listen to this and you actually take advice. This advice is, do not attend a PhD program where you have to take out loans or use loans to pay for it. Apply to programs and and accept an offer that's going to pay for the full thing for 5 years, however long your program is. Don't be in debt for a PhD program. It's not worth it out. That's why I always advise that you apply to at least 10 programs, because then you can see how the funding looks like at every institution if you get accepted into these. But that would be my biggest advice. Don't accept an offer where you have to either pay out of pocket or take out a loan, because this is 5 years and it's expensive. Imagine if you had no funding. Um, so that's something I would ask about. Like, how does your funding work? What is your structure of your funding? You want to know the nitty gritty details, because they leave a lot out. What I've learned, when on their website, they don't tell you every little detail about funding and how it works. So I would ask about that first of all. I would ask, maybe if you're like in the application phase, which I'm guessing you probably are, I would ask maybe like what sets applicants apart from admitted to not admitted. And then they're gonna tell you like, oh, statement of purpose. Like, most people have clear goals, like whatever it is. I don't know. I'm just like assuming here, but like I would ask that question. I would ask maybe, does GRE and GPA matter? Like how, like what weight do they hold? In the admissions process. Maybe you might want to ask something like, how does that admissions process work? Is there an interview phase? Is there a yeah, I would ask that. I would ask, how do we know if a faculty is taking students? Is there a website? Should I email them directly? How do we know if a faculty member who I want to potentially work with is going on sabbatical? Because those things, if your professor that you want to work with is going on sabbatical, even if you have the best application, they might not accept you because that person's leaving or is not working for a year, whatever it is, right? So you want to know, like, how can I ask these professors if they're going to be accepting students for the next year, right? Um, yeah, those are some of the questions I would ask. This is gonna be recorded. It's my first time doing a live, so I'm not sure how it works. I'm hoping that I can just post it on the channel right after this. Um, but yeah, so stay tuned. I'm not sure how it works. It's my first time doing one, so yes, if I can make it record, if I can like save the recording and post it on the channel, it will be up on there either after this or later today. Okay, so can you directly get into Harvard PhD program after a bachelor's degree? And if yes, what are the basic requirements? And you can, or yes, you can. It just depends on the program. Some programs, they might say like you need a master's. Um, so I would look on the website and see if that's the case. Because for example, like some of the programs I applied to, not Harvard, obviously, for PhD programs, they required masters. So I would just look on their website and see. They usually tell you like here's what you need to apply. If it requires a master's before the PhD, then you obviously have to have that before you can apply. But most PhD programs, honestly, anybody can apply out of undergrad, with a master's, without a master's, etc. So I would just look at their website and see what are the requirements for Harvard. Are you asking about the Harvard Graduate School of Education? If that's the case, then the education school does not require a master's to get into the PhD program. You actually get a master's on the way to the PhD if you get accepted. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I would just look on the website. Are you open to reading and helping on the personal statement? I do have a review service on Fiverr that I always paste on the description of most of my videos. So you can go on there and look at like how much I charge, etc. And I can help you with the feedback on your personal statement. I do plan to make a video on how I go about the feedback, like what it looks like, in case you want to take advantage of the opportunity. Because yeah, I just want to showcase like here's how I go about reviewing your statement of purposes. Here's the advice you should expect to receive. And so yeah, so I might do that video soon. So someone's asking to do videos on how to apply for grad fellowships. I do have a video, or I do want to make some videos on that as well. And I plan to do a live, like I don't know if you ever seen those videos like that are like study with me sessions. So I'm working on a fellowship currently, and it's due in a couple of weeks. So I'm planning to do like a live study with me, where I'll be on here working on my fellowship, and you can all join me and work on your applications and stuff like that. And then I'll take little breaks and I can answer questions too, but I plan to do like a session like that in the future, in the near future, just so I can like. First of all, I need some space where I can just work on that because right now I'm actually working on finals because finals are due next week for my courses. But I do have this fellowship that I have to complete, so I want to hold a live study with me session where I work on the fellowship and then I can answer some of your questions as well, and you can come and work with me as well. Um, let's see. I was an undergraduate teaching assistant, but the professor who was my supervisor at the time is not one of my referees. Is that a problem? It's not a problem. I think that I think so. If you're applying to PhD programs, my tactic in terms of selecting referees would be research. so, so because again, the PhD is a research degree, right? So you want to make sure that the three referees are all professors who have somewhat, supervised you in a research context, or even if it was a, let's say you did well in one of their classes that you are applying for the graduate program, whatever, in that topic, then that's what I would choose. I would choose faculty. So that's not going to be a problem at all. I would just say in your resume or CV, you want to make sure that you are talking about your experience with teaching in a very detailed way, and just to kind of show, if especially if you want to become a professor, if that's your career goal, you want to showcase that you have experience being a professor, right, as a teacher assistant. So explain that in the resume or CV. All right, do universities usually require signatures on LORs, like printed and signed and scanned? It is a bummer. Yeah, so they are gonna they should sign it, with either, and there should be a letterhead too, um, because again, this is a formal document, so um, they don't want people to make up statement or letters of recommendations, right? They don't want you to make these up and submit them, right? So the letter of rec writer, the referee, should be submitting these letters of recommendation. Um, yeah. Okay, I'm gonna go through a couple of more questions because I've been here for an hour already. And I definitely want to wrap this up in a little bit. So ask some more questions before I wrap up. And then yeah, thank you for the luck on the finals. I have to work on finals actually after this. But ask your questions now because I'm here right now. So let me see. So other questions that I have received from comments have been, what made you choose HGSC? So that's a good question. I haven't really discussed this on any of my videos. And yeah, one of the reasons why I chose the Harvard Graduate School of Education as my master's program, the program I was going to send for my master's program, was for a couple of reasons. So at that time, I had applied to 12 programs. I got into seven of those programs, and I actually got into two of the Ivy Leagues. So I got into Harvard, and then I got into Columbia. And there was a mix of education policy and higher education master's programs. Those were my two topics that I did for master's programs, and I got into those two programs. So I was between attending HGSC for their education policy management program Columbia University for their education policy program, and then I was University of Washington, which is in my home state, education policy program, education leadership policy program, something along those lines. And I was in like a pickle, I guess if you want to call it, like because the University of Washington offered me a full ride for a 9-month program, and they're always top ranked in education policy in the nation, so they're always in the top 10. So I knew it was going to be a great program, and it's in my home state. I didn't have to move too much, you know what I mean? Like I can be close to my family, etc. So I was almost going to go to the University of Washington because um, it was fully funded, right? It was close to my hometown, and then also it was a top program ed policy. But my one of my mentors at my undergrad told me like you need to go to Harvard. Like not that many people from your background, not that many people from your hometown. I lived in a really small town in Washington get into Harvard. So you can't pass up that opportunity. Yes, it's expensive because it is. It's like about $50,000 just for tuition, and then like roughly ten to $15,000 for living expenses. And they don't even offer you that much funding. I do have a video on exposing the funding for that, but they only offered me a $10,000 grant, um, and that's it. And so yes, I'm grateful for that $10,000, but like in the large scheme of things, $10,000 is nothing compared to the price tag of HGSC. So, as someone who comes from a low income background, like my family wasn't able to support me with financially in undergrad or graduate school, I had to pretty much figure it out on my own. I was like scared to take out $50,000 in loans. And that's why I wanted to do that's why I was considering the UW fully funded because, I come from a poor background. Like $50,000 is a lot of money. Anyway, so my undergraduate mentor, she was like, you need to go, like, no one like, it's hard to get into Harvard, especially from someone from your background, etc. And so I was like, you know what? Let me look more into it. So I ended up going to Harvard, like to one of their live webinar sessions, and I really liked my peers that were there. A lot of the ones that I met were from similar backgrounds as I was, so they were Latinos. They were from all over the country, but like I really liked that experience. And then also, I couldn't beat that one of the best, well-known family engagement faculty was at HGSC, who ended up being my faculty mentor. And so I just decided to go because of the network, because of the name, because of the opportunities I could have gotten beyond the degree. And I can attest to a couple of things. So the name does hold weight. Like it just does, right? You're paying for a brand. You're paying for like everybody knows Harvard internationally, right? So like it does hold weight when you're applying to jobs. So I saw like for me like I was able to get interviews at a lot of different organizations that I wanted to work at, and I think the name did help. I would also say that like when I went to HGSC, like there's a different mindset that you gain from being in that environment. And I say, so the mindset that I'm talking about is the entrepreneurship part of it. Like before I attended HGSC, I never thought myself as like a business minded person or a potential entrepreneur, or that I had the capacity to start my own company, start my own theory, start my own like or create my own theory or create anything really. Like I think I had that capacity just because I wasn't exposed to that growing up. And so HGSC, attending the classes, meeting the peers, talking to the faculty, it really shifted my mindset in the sense that like I am capable of creating this big change that I envision for myself, right? Like now I have the confidence in terms of saying like I can confidently say that before my career is over, I'm gonna make a change in I'm interested in community colleges. I'm gonna make a change in community college systems in my state. And I can say that confidently and saying like I have the skills, I have the capacity to do that. Before HGSC, I didn't think I didn't have that the confidence. I wasn't like I was like, am I smart enough? I don't know. Can I really make a change at that scale? I didn't have the skill sets. I didn't have the mindset. I didn't have the background for that, and now I do. So I think that attending HGSC provided me with that mindset. And obviously, like I started this channel, right? Like YouTube channel, like I'm slowly growing. I'm seeing success, and that all started out there. I don't think I would be confident to start this channel without having that mindset shift, because now like I'm hoping to create this into like a small business, because I do like helping people with grad school applications. I do like helping people, especially if you're like unsure about like what the process is like. I made this channel for that reason, for me to share my expertise with all of you who maybe are like, I don't have the money to be able to hire a consultant to help me with this. You know what I mean? That's why I created this channel, and I'm hoping to like, now that I'm seeing like a slow growth, that I'm hoping to make it into like a small business that provides some type of monetization in the future. And I don't think I would be confident to do that if it wasn't for HGSC. So like that entrepreneurship mindset shift does happen at HGSC, because everybody's creating a bunch of things. Like one of my peers created an app for to learn Mandarin, I think it was, through a video game. And they created that from start to finish at HGSC in that 9 month. And now it's their full-time job. They pitched their idea, they're getting investors and etc. And so I think that if you go to HGSC, you not only build that mindset, but that's a time where you can create whatever you want to create and then get expertise and feedback from those experts. So I would take advantage of that if you end up going. Um, okay, let's see. So if you state you are a teacher assistant, does it mean it was an official employment? I just helped. Yeah, so it's interesting because anything you do as an undergrad, an internship, a teacher assistant position, like anything like that, doesn't count as full time. And they say that on the application. They're gonna say like, if you weren't working 40 hours a week and employed by an actual employer, whatever that means, if you weren't working full time, then your experiences don't mean anything. Like, and and that kind of sucks, because like as an undergrad, like I did a lot. I did a lot of internships. I did a bunch of research, and they didn't count any of that as professional full-time experience. So on the application, I didn't even mention that all of my experiences, because they said don't mention those because those don't count. So yeah, so that teaching assistant position does not count as official employment according to their definition. You can still mention it on your resume or CV, and if they don't strictly state on the application like that you can't mention non full-time experience, then I would put it. I put it on mine. Like I was like, okay, they didn't say that, I'm gonna put it because it's important to me, and so be it if they don't believe that it's not full time or it's not official, right? So if they don't strictly say that, then I would just put it. And yeah, you can call it call it teacher assistant. Um, is it necessary to include the detail of our social enterprise in SOP? Mine is quite new and have not done a lot of work. I would say in your case, if you haven't done that much work on it, then I wouldn't mention it, because they want in the SOP, you want to showcase impact. If there's no impact yet, then it's not worth sharing. I think a lot of the time, like when I read these statement of purposes, like students want to, or applicants want to showcase like all these extraordinary things they're doing, which is great, but that all belongs in the statement of, I mean, in the resume or CV. Put that in the resume or CV. The statement of purpose is again to show those stories behind the social enterprise, right? Why did you want to create it? Like what impact do you hope to make? How does that fit with your career goals? That's what they want to know. They don't want to know like, oh, you started this, like, oh, I guess they do want to know like you started this project, right? Because it shows a lot of initiative. It shows that you are capable of starting, something from scratch, right? But they don't just want to know like, oh, you just started and that's it. Like they want to know like the the behind, the story behind it. Why is it important for you to create this? What impact do you hope to make? What impact have you made? And how can a graduate degree, help you either skill it or fix some of the issues you are facing, etc. That's what they want to know. They don't want to know like, oh yeah, I created this great thing and blah 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 blah, and that's it. They want to know the story behind it. Um, okay, okay, let's see. A couple more questions. I'm gonna go for another 10 minutes. So ask your questions now. I'm gonna go until the 1:30 mark, 1 hour and 30-minute mark. So more questions that I've received from you all in the comments. What is a good time to apply for graduate studies? It's a good question. I think it's gonna depend. Again, I keep saying case by case, it's gonna depend, but it really does. I think there's no right or wrong time to start. I would say if you one of the ways that you know that you want to attend a PhD program is if you have a lot of questions, right? And as a PhD student, you want to, conduct research projects, work on your finals to either like help advance a field, answer questions, and at the end, you're going to be writing a long piece, a dissertation where you tackle a question or questions in a certain subfield, right? And so if you are always asking all these questions, if you're frustrated with, you know, solutions that you might think are inequitable, for example, in education, then I would consider a PhD. If there's if you want to get into a new field and you want to learn about it in more detail and depth, then I would apply for a PhD. Let's see, what was the question? When's a good time? It's hard because for me, I already knew that I wanted to apply for grad school right after undergrad, but I knew I didn't want to apply to a PhD immediately. So I chose master's programs. And specifically, I told myself, like, I want to apply to a master's program that's a year or under a year to complete because I was at that point, I was burnt out of school. I've been in school for pretty much my whole life at that point. Um, and so I decided to apply for master's programs right away and then take a break and work and then apply for PhD programs. So that was my thought process in terms of when was the right time for me to apply to certain degrees in graduate school. So I want you to just kind of reflect on, you know, why you're applying, how could this advance your career, etc. And then that should be the right time for you to apply. A question in the chat here. Can you talk about contacting professors before applying? So I talked about this briefly a little while ago, but I would say at this point, because most applications are due either they were already due December 1st, or they're going to be due mid-December, or some of them are due in January. Um, you're probably not going to get a response, especially because the holidays are coming up and people are busy, finals, they're preparing for the next quarter, the next semester, etc. You're not going to get a response at this point. So if you're applying in this current cycle, you can email them, don't expect a response, but also that's not gonna determine if you're gonna get in or not either. Um, if you are gonna apply in the future, then I would start those conversations now. Email them now or email them in the summer before you apply, and then ask them questions about research if you're applying for PhDs because they don't want to know like you don't want to ask them questions like about admissions because they know nothing about admissions. Like that's not their job. Their job is to teach. Their job is to conduct research, and it should be about that. It shouldn't be about like what should I do to improve my application. Like they're gonna be subjective and they're gonna be like I don't even know honestly. Like I never asked those questions, but like don't ask them those questions. You want to start a conversation about their research and potentially trying to see if they're a good fit for your what's it called your what you want to do as a field. Um, okay, let's see. It's gonna be the last question here, just because I have to get going. But let's see the last question. So, how to negotiate for more financial aid? That's a good question. So, I would say um, once you receive your admissions offers with the funding, I would look at them and compare them all together and see, what they look like, right? So, if one program is offering you a fully funded program for 5 years, which includes tuition remission, which includes what's it called? Tuition remission and a living stipend and then maybe health insurance, and then there's a program that you really want to go to, but they only offer you that exact same package for only 2 years, and that's common, by the way. That could happen. Um, then I would to negotiate it, I would say like, I've been accepted into these programs. They offered me this type of package. Are you able to match that offer? I really want to go to I want to really want to be in your program. Can you match that offer? And that's how we go about starting negotiation. You want to show like, have this great offer, but I really want to go to your program. Can you help me there? Can you add more funding? Can you match it? That's how I would start. Um, all right, so I'm gonna end the Q&A here just because I have to get going. But um, but yeah, thank you for the comment here on like recommending my service. I think I do a good job, not to brag, but I do like look at your statement of purposes like multiple times. I give myself 7 days to look at it just because I read it multiple times, and I try to be as critical as I can, provide you like, with examples, and just try to give you the best advice based on my experience, so you can write like a good piece. And also just for a little bit more background, I do when I was an undergrad, I wanted to become an English teacher that focused on writing, so teaching students how to write. And so my expertise is really in writing. That's kind of like I learned how to teach people how to write, and that's some of the tactics that I do implement when I do this statement of purpose review service. So if you have the means to be able to use my service, definitely go check it out. And I'll put it in the description down below too, in this video if I can. But yeah, so thank you all for being here. I'm gonna have this recorded hopefully up if I could figure that out. But good luck on your applications, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video.